Hi folks, I'm Mike Shea from slyflourish.com and twitter.com/slyflourish, and I'm the author of the book Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. In a previous video, I gave an overview of the 8 steps for role-playing game preparation outlined in the book. Today, we're going to go over the rest of the book so you can see what it has to offer to help you with your own games. In future videos, I'll be breaking down each of the 8 game preparation steps so we can dig into each one. But right now, we're going to take a look at the rest of the book. So this book's goal is to help dungeon masters make the most of their game preparation. That's its overall goal. And more specifically, we talk about getting the most out of your game by preparing less. Where do you want to focus your time as a game master to make sure that you are getting the highest value for your time and energy and making the game as good as it can be? That's the real focus of the book. So the introduction of the book, which you can see over on the left side here, talks about who it's for and why we wrote this book, why I wrote this book. But it also talks about how to read it. It's a 100-page book, and we're all lazy if we picked it up for that reason. So the reality is you don't need to read the whole book cover to cover in order to get value out of it. You can just go through the Lazy DM Prep checklist and get a lot out of that. You can go through the table of contents and pick the chapters that are particularly interesting. Each of the chapters has a summary, like a bullet point summary of all of the main points that chapter had. So you can skim read the book and just read those sections. You'll see them as we go through it. So that's all covered in the introduction. The first chapter of the book discusses the whole concept of the whole philosophy of the Lazy Dungeon Master. That we focus on what benefits our game. We remove anything that we are working on that we don't enjoy and that doesn't actually offer a flexible and a game where we are able to heavily improvise where things go. Many DMs, we all have stories about how we prepare a whole lot for our game, and then our players come and they take a hard left turn, and all the stuff we prepared goes out the window. This is why this book exists. And the way we handle it is by not preparing all of that stuff and building a platform for flexibility. So you'll see all that as we go through the book. But the whole point is to prepare what benefits the game and omit what does not. So as you saw in the previous video, if you haven't, you can see a link down below. We covered the 8 steps for game preparation. When you're sitting down to prepare, what are the things you can do? So we're not going to do that. Now we're going to skip right over. Let's just go right back to the table of contents here. And we will skip down to chapter 11. Throughout the whole book, we use an example. We build a small adventure about hobgoblins who have taken over an old castle and are using it to invade a nearby village. That's kind of the seed of the adventure. So what we do in chapter 11 is we kind of put everything together that we may have done in chapters 3 through 10. Those are the 8 steps chapters. So this whole one shows what preparation notes might look like. These are pretty robust notes too. This is all inclusive. Where many times the notes that we actually prepare for our game would not have nearly as much stuff. So chapter 12 talks about reducing the checklist. This is a really important one. The 8 steps are not required for all game prep. You can cut out whatever steps don't work for you. I cut out steps all the time. I usually stick to about 3. And which steps you decide to keep and which steps you omit are dependent on a few things. One is, what are you comfortable with as a GM? And 2, what kind of game are you running? If you're running a published adventure, you might not need fantastic locations well articulated. You might not need to spend as much time worrying about what monsters are going to be in a game. If you're running a homebrew game, if you're running a homebrew game, fantastic adventures are very important, and what monsters make sense for the location are also very important. If you are running a one-shot game where the whole story is encapsulated in one session, that's a different checklist. If you're in the middle of an ongoing campaign, that's a different checklist. So picking which elements make sense for your session are really important. And an example that we use here is saying that if you are running like a one-shot game, creating a strong start, defining your secrets and clues, and developing fantastic locations can get you really far. The other 5 steps? The other 5 steps could help, but you may not need them as much. Like if you're like, I got friends coming over in 20 minutes and I need to get a game together and I don't know what I'm going to run. These are you could do worse by not focusing on those 3. However, if you're running a published adventure and you're in the middle of it, maybe you don't need to develop fantastic locations, but you do have rich character arcs. So instead, you might focus on the characters, review the characters. Who are they? What are they doing? define your secrets and clues, which is a staple pretty much. And all of the prep I do almost always has secrets and clues. And then skipping fantastic locations, but instead making sure that you have that strong start. So reviewing the characters, creating a strong start, and developing your secrets and clues might be all you need if you're in the middle of a published adventure. So that's an important idea that you customize this list for what kind of game you're running and the kinds of things that you need as a DM. But then there are other high value preparation activities as well. Handouts are really nice. Maps are good. Things that we can physically put on the table to help bring the players into the game are really helpful. Artwork, we can show it on an iPad or we can print it out. What are some evocative artwork that shows rather than tells the kinds of monsters that they're fighting or the areas that they're going into? Music, I'm a big fan. I've got a pair of speakers that sit underneath my table, and I have it hooked up to my phone, and I play a couple of different soundtracks. I have a relaxing D&D music soundtrack. I have a sinister D&D music soundtrack and a combat soundtrack. So you can think of it as like when they're walking around in town, you put on the relaxing soundtrack. When they're in a fight, you put on the combat soundtrack, and so on. Other people will have more detailed song breakouts, and we offer a list. I offer a list of various soundtracks that I think work really well for our fantasy RPGs. The next step is on the toolkit. This is also focused on what physical objects help us run our game. We probably all have a different one. I love to go on YouTube and look at people's DM kits. You can, in another video, you can see the things that I carry around. It's getting smaller and smaller. It's like dice and a white erase, a dry erase piece of laminated paper, some markers. I really don't bring much these days to a D&D game, and a cheat sheet. This chapter talks about all the things we might have. What is our GM's notebook? Whether it's a digital notebook or a physical notebook, where are we putting our notes? How are we capturing what's happening in the game? How do we capture the notes while we're preparing? Do we have a campaign worksheet? Who are the characters? What do they want? Draw out like all the loops of what's going on in a campaign on a sheet of paper. We have some templates that I offer up for free, but you can also use your own templates to kind of figure things out. Of all of the tools that most GMs use, a random name list is really important. So a lot of people have that. And 3x5 cards, very valuable tool. Write little notes, throw them across to another player, draw little quick maps or little pictures. You could do, a lot worse than carry around a small stack of 3x5 cards. And you can use those 3x5 cards for initiative cards, which is something I talk about here. And then there's GM screens and cheat sheets. People love these. I kind of prefer cheat sheets because I don't like to have a screen in front of me. So I have a cheat sheet on the table. But other people swear by GM screens, and those can be very valuable. And a dry erase foot mat is really nice. If you play on a grid or you want to have like a 5-foot square battle map, dry erase battle maps are great. They're cheap. They're like $12, and they're really easy to carry around. Then we have our books, books, adventures, miniatures, maps, terrain. We talk about all of that in this chapter. What are all the things? So you can kind of build your own checklist of what you think you need for yours. And one of the things we offer is prune it, right? Get rid of the things that you don't need, right? What are the things that you're bundling around, you're carrying around? Do you really need all that stuff? I see a lot of GMs that have rolling carts full of material. Maybe an iPhone, man. You could try it with a smaller set and see how it works, because the less stuff you have, the more flexible your game is. It's a big part of this book. Reskinning. We have a whole chapter on reskinning. Reskinning is one of those true hacks that works so well. Almost every Game Master guide that I read in preparation for writing this book talks about reskinning. Starfinder talks about it. D&D talks about it. Fifth edition D&D talks about it. Previous ones. They all talk about the value of reskinning. Take a bundle of mechanics like a monster stat block, reflavor it with a whole different description in your game, and now it's something new. Very simple technique. Do it with game worlds, right? You can take all of Kobold Press's Midgard and bundle it up, and then take components of it and just call it something slightly different, drop it into your game, and you're ready to go. A lot of work has been done that you can capitalize off of without having to spend a lot of time and energy, and it's worth doing. So while the temptation might be to build your own, I'm going to make my own monster, I'm going to make my own villain, I'm going to make my own city, I'm going to make my own maps, I'm going to make my own campaign world. There's so much material out there, and we can really capitalize off of it. So reskinning is a super valuable tip. Like the artwork in this book? I really love this artwork so much. It's so great. Pedro Patier did all of the artwork in this book, and I just couldn't be happier with it. So building a lazy campaign. World building and campaign building is a huge topic. There's a lot of different sources of material to read about. Kobold Press has a whole guide to world building. I did an interview actually just last night with Wolfgang Bauer talking specifically about world building. And many DMs agree with the idea of starting where the characters are and working outward. Start small and spiral out. So we talk about it in this book as the spiral campaign method, where, where are the characters right now? What's going on with them? Where's your strong start? And just start to spiral out. However, there are a few things we can do. What is the hook of the campaign overall? Is it kill, dethrone the sorcerer queen? Is it, end the war between the humans and the orc emperor? There's lots of like, what's the main hook for the campaign that you really want people, stop the rise of the demon lord, can be a whole campaign hook. So we talk about that. And then there's like, what are the 6 things that separate this particular campaign from all of the other ones that your players have played? You can almost think of it as like the secrets and clues, only you're going to write these down and hand them to your players, which are what makes this campaign world different. The world is, think about Dark Sun, right? The world is trying to kill you, right? The world is your villain. There is no metal. The gods are gone. The halflings are cannibals. The elves are outlanders. What are all of the things that separate this world from all of the others? And then the next is a technique we took from a game called Dungeon World, fantastic RPG that I highly recommend, which is called a front. And a front is like a villain or some kind of thing that's moving in the game. It could be a meteor is about to crash down on the planet. It could be that the demon lord is about to rise. It could be that the Lich Queen is about to take over, right? So the front are the Lich Queen or the meteor or the demon lord. And so we have them. We have, what are their goals? The Lich Queen wants to take over all of the north, or the meteor wants to destroy the world, or the demon lord wants to fill the world with demons and turn it into a layer of hell. Those are the goals. And then what are the things that you see that start to move those goals forward? What are the things that the characters will witness that show them that the plot is moving forward? Undead have begun to attack the city. Demons are on the rise. Portals to hell are opening up all over the world. All of these different steps that are leading to the final goal, which is where these fronts are going. So we talk a lot about fronts in here. It's a very, very powerful technique. But then the other one is like, instead of worrying too much about your campaign, worry about the next session, right? Spend the time in those 8 steps. That's why we focus so much on the 8 steps, because your next game is the important one, right? And these other things are important and they're good to kind of get underway, but really what's going to matter is, where does the game start? What's going to draw the players into the game? What are the scenes that they're going to see? What interesting locations are they going to discover? What secrets and clues will they uncover in the next game? You can almost fill all of this stuff out with that. But so we talk about that. Session 0. Before you're about to run a new campaign, it's really nice to get all the players together when you don't have a lot of going on and talk about what the game is going to be like. Describe the rule set. Run a little quick demo of how things work. Talk to them about how to handle topics that may not be comfortable for people. Make sure everybody's comfortable at the table. What tools do you have in place to make sure that if someone is uncomfortable, they can tap something and step away from what's going on in the game. So really useful to bring everybody to session 0. What are you going to have special character options that are different than a normal game? If you're going to run a Midgard game, talking about the options from Midgard heroes that they could run instead of just what's in the default player's handbook. So we talk a lot about that in here. And how do you bring the characters together? Are they already together? Are there pairings between characters? They all have a bond between one other character. Are they all part of one main group? This is something I really like. This is a good lazy trick, which is just have them all part of an existing faction. You guys are all members of the Explorers Guild. You guys are all part of the Demon Hunters Association, right? Like they're already bound to a group and a new NPC, and they already know why they're there. And if you can set that up, then it's really fast, and then they don't have to worry too much about the interconnecting of characters. So one thing I forgot to mention is that this book is broken into 3 parts: preparing for your game, running your game, and thinking about your game. So you'll see all of these sections. All of the previous chapters were on preparing for your game. Now we get into the tips and tricks for actually running your game. So the first are like, what are the top traits of good GMs? This is something that I had spent a lot of time researching and surveying and reading a lot of material and trying to figure out what makes for really good GMs. And there's really like 3 main criteria for a good GM: improvisation, flexibility, and adaptability. Like really, it's not so much like rules knowledge or lore knowledge or anything like that. It's about making sure that you can run a fun game whatever direction it goes. So, staying flexible and creative and improvisational is really important. Learning how to relax, right? Just taking it easy and letting things kind of go. It's really hard. And sometimes we don't like to, because we built these things and we spend a lot of time and energy on them and we want them to go a certain way. It's okay. If they don't want to go there, don't let them go. They don't have to go there, right? Be flexible. A lot of times, and I'll see it in my own games where I do very lightweight prep, as you can imagine. And they'll say like, oh, well, he wants us to go here. And I'm like, man, I don't care where you go. Like, I want you to go where your characters want to go. I will figure it out. So I had it where I set up like a great big Dwarven Forge arena, and they're all like, they looked at it and like, this is dangerous. We're not going here. I'm like, cool. And I didn't worry about it, right? It didn't really take that long to set up. Listening, and how do you listen to your characters and make sure that you're drawing from their information, and trusting your tools. So this whole chapter is about like, what are the traits that can really help, that we can each work on as a GM to cultivate and make ourselves a better DM. How to summarize the previous session. I'm a big fan of letting the players describe how the last session ended. It helps me know what they think is important. It helps them fill in some of the blanks. I can fill in the blanks if there's anything going on there. So I'm a big fan of this, as is, I quote a couple of books, and Matt Colville, who also talked about the value of letting the players summarize what happened. And I've noted that I have players who will take better notes about what's going on in the game, because they know it's not exactly a quiz, but they know that they're going to be asked, and it's kind of nice. So there's value in sort of asking the players to summarize your next game. What are some tricks to bring the players into the storytelling of the game? I'm a big fan of drawing the players into the story and into the fiction, not worrying so much about their mechanics. I mean, the mechanics are fun, and people have characters and they want to see their character do fun stuff. They want to roll a lot of dice, but how do you draw them into the fiction of the game as well? And I offer a few small tricks. Describe your killing blow. Matt Mercer does this on Critical Role, and I think it's picked up. I bet a bunch of DMs have picked it up from him, which is how do you want to do this, right? When you kill a final villain, let the player describe what they do. I think it's a really powerful trick. What is an interesting physical characteristic of a monster? I find this way better than saying you're fighting Orc 3, is you hit an Orc. Describe an interesting physical characteristic of this Orc before you hit him. He's got a big green mohawk, and you're a green mohawk Orc, and all of them you get these little subtle in-story descriptions for every monster. So now you've got just unique monsters across the board. You can write it down in your little whiteboard so that when you're keeping track of damage, instead of Orc 2, Orc 3, Orc 4, it's Orc with mohawk, Orc with 3 earrings, Orc that's got a hook for a hand, right? And you have all these really interesting little traits that the players came up with. It's a way to bring the players into the game. You can extend that also to what are some of the things you find interesting in the world. I tend not to do this as much, but it is a popular technique of, you go to an inn. Let's describe what this inn looks like. And also another trick, if you have a long journey, is to say, who wants to tell me about something interesting that happened on your journey? And you want them to break out of the character in this. Like, you want them to, from the party's perspective, what happened, rather than my character worked on making a magic scroll. It's like, well, but what did you see? Well, we came to a big crevasse, and he had to, our friend, Rhinoth over here had to make like a rope bridge that we could all hang on to, and stuff like that. So interesting stories that the players bring. So it's really, we were talking about small baby steps to bring people forward. What else do we have? So improvising NPCs. We talk about developing NPCs in the 8 steps, but we also know that many times we're going to have to come up with an NPC on the spot. Number one trick is make sure you have a good name. Drop a good name on there. And then other tricks are to put yourself in their mind. What would this NPC act like given the current circumstances? You can always throw an existing stat block if you need them, but and you can use the same tricks that we use in our game prep to improvise one. What is an interesting character archetype from popular fiction that you might drop on them? But really, you just need a name. Just drop yourself in the character. How would they act, and go with that. You don't have to worry about stat blocks. You don't have to worry about making sure all your DCs are correct. Just get in the mind of the character and run with it. So then we talk about improvising scenes and situations. Instead of developing a clear outline of where the game is going to go, there are many times where the players go to an area and it's a situation, and the characters interact with the situation. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how a scene is going to play out. You think about this like, here's a castle. It's filled with hobgoblins. There's a hobgoblin warlord with a pair of hellhounds that he goes with, but they also go out on patrol. So you kind of think about it, this is where you can think of it like a heist, right? Here's the situation. How are the players going to interact with it? So it's a different way of thinking about a scene in a game. It's like there's a location, there are inhabitants, there's situations that are going on, and then the characters come in and mess with that. We don't know how it's going to go. We just want to make sure that we're setting up the first 3 of those. So we talk about that a lot here. Combat styles. If you have been following me at all, you know that I talk a lot about different types of combat. I wrote a series of articles about Theater of the Mind combat for D&D Beyond recently. I also am a huge fan of Dwarven Forge and run many elaborate tabletop arenas for all sorts of, for both battles and for other things too. So I don't think that there is one solution to this, and I think that we are best served by having all of these solutions in our toolbox. If we're familiar with running Theater of the Mind and our players are familiar with how we run Theater of the Mind, that's a real quick way to say, wow, I totally am unprepared for this battle. Let's just talk it through. You can also use an abstract map where you just sort of draw things out on paper. And then for gridded tactical combat, there's a whole bunch of ways to run that I don't really dig in too much because most of the GM books these days talk about that as well. So just a small chapter on that. And I'm a big fan of the hybrid approach. Don't worry so much about 5-foot squares, but at least have a diagram that shows people the rough positioning of combatants and any special features. So the main thing is try them all out and keep them all in your golf bag so that you can pull out the right club when you need it. Maintaining the pace. I highly recommend a book called Hamlet's Hit Points by Robin Laws, a fantastic book about how to keep the pacing of your game oscillating up and down. Good things happen, bad things happen. Good things happen, bad things happen. And you want that pace to go because if all good things are happening all the time, the players get bored. If all bad things are happening, they get frustrated. So you want this sort of drive, and the pace of. One of the tricks of the pace is just to make sure you're always putting decisions in front of the players for them to choose. You don't want to just keep talking things out. You want them to be doing things. Action is the name of the game. What are they going to do? And then how do you put challenges in front of them, and then benefits when they need it, and then challenges and so on. So we talk about that all throughout this chapter. And here's a whole bunch of examples of upward beats and downward beats that you can drop in at any given time. And these don't have to be things that are directly related to the characters. They can be the place that they're in suddenly starts filling with smoke and they don't know why, fun stuff like that. So now we come to the third section of the game, third section of this book, which is thinking about your game. What do you do in your downtime when you're not preparing but you're not playing, but you still want to kind of get your head in the game? So I talk about priming the GM's brain. What materials can we put in our head that help us improvise interesting things at the table? The more great fiction we put in our heads, the more we're going to be able to kind of draw upon that fiction when we're running our game. So good TV shows, good movies, good books, good video games, good comic books, absorb them, right? Go look for the good ones and bring them in. So I offer a lot of suggestions about books, comics, video games, TV shows, movies, all sorts of things that they're in my list of ones that I really thought influenced me and how I'm running my games. Well, a big one is go read the actual books, like the RPG books. Go grab the monster manual, read it cover to cover, read the lore about the monsters. Think about who are all of the creatures that are connected to mind flayers and what mind flayers have been doing. The aboleths. Think about the history of aboleths, not their stat block, but how they operate in the world. Think about all of the creatures that are connected to hags, right? Hags have all this, like an ecosystem around them, Banderhobs and, I don't know, those crazy cow things that kill you with a look. I forget their name, and their name is totally impronounceable anyway. So, read the background on those and see how they interact with one another. It's really interesting, and the lore is great. And there's it's hard to find material better for running a good RPG than the source books of the RPG and the fiction. I think we skim over it and we just kind of look at the rules and focus on the mechanics, and we ignore the lore because we're like, I've read all this a million times. It's worth spending the time reading. That is not a lazy technique, but it offers a high value for the energy you spend. It's fun. Just go, grab the books and read. So then I also talk about taking a walk. I think there's fewer valuable times than to spend 30 minutes disconnected from your phone, taking a walk in nature, and thinking about your game. Pick a question that you're going to focus on while you're on that walk. Think about the mind of a villain, and go off and take a walk. I'm a big fan of that. Get away from the desk, get away from your social media, go spend some time and just think for maybe a half hour. So then there's also GM brain exercises that I offer up in this book. And we can start with who are the characters? I like this as a quiz. If you can't name all of the characters in your game right now, your player characters, they're probably not as much in the center of the game as they need to be. The characters are driving the story, so you should be, fans of them and think about them highly. If you can't name them, it's worth the time thinking more about the characters and what they're doing. I admit right now in my Sunday game, I can't name all the characters because we only played 3 or 4 sessions. I could probably, if I thought about it, name all the characters for my Tomb of Annihilation game because we've been playing for like 14 months. So that's a good step. What are the villains doing right now? I talked about the villains before and their goals. So you have these main villains and you think about like, what's the Xanathar up to? What is he trying to do? What is... who else? The Castellanters. Like, what are the Castellanters doing right now while the world is going on? You think about what the characters did recently and what's going on in the world, and you think about what are my villains up to? This is a way more valuable trick than thinking like, where's my next game going to go? Right? Like, how is it going to play out? You don't know how it's going to play out. All you know is what are the things you can put in place in the beginning that are going to make it interesting. So if you say like, what are the Castellanters doing right now? And it's like, well, they might have heard that the characters broke into their warehouse and that frightens them. So they're going to burn the warehouse to the ground, right? So now you have a strong start. The warehouse burns down and like, who burned it down, right? So there could be real interesting things are going on there. And that this gets right into what fronts are on the move. If Castellanters are a front, what are they doing that's getting them closer to their goal? So, and then the other trick, a good GM exercise, just go through the 8 steps. Think about your next game and say, what's the strong start going to be? A giant begins rampaging through the town. And he's angry because of something. Okay, giant rampages through the town. What are the secrets that they might discover? The town is sitting upon a 500-year-old graveyard of stone giants that has been disrupted. Okay, so you can start to think about like all your secrets. Just go through them in your head. So a good exercise, just go through the steps. Big fan of the steps. So now I have some of the chapters in this book are a little more philosophical. One of them is what are the truths about GMing? A big one, which is a nice one, is that everyone's there to have fun. They're not testing you. They're not going to come there to be critical. They're coming there because they want to have a good time. So generally speaking, we can relax because we know that the players are on our side and we all want to do fun. So if you screw up, laugh at it, right? I screw up all the time. Every game I run, I screw up. And it's a good time to just kind of laugh with my friends and we kind of joke about it and move on. It's never a disaster, right? Players don't care as much as you think. So this is a hard one. This is something I was talking last night with Wolfgang Bauer about, not to name drop, but he and I were talking, you can see the video. And that we are often way more invested in our game and in our world than our players are going to be. And we have to recognize that they're just not going to be interested. This is why we query them regularly on like, what did you note from the last game, or where do you want to go in the game right now? Make sure that we're keeping track of the fact that our players are probably not, this isn't in all cases, there's usually one player who really is, or people that are really into it, but generally speaking, they're not as into it as we are. And that's okay. That's not a problem. Players want to see their characters do awesome stuff. When it comes down to it, that's what they want to see. So what are the things you can put in front of the characters that are going to make players excited to see it? And we are not the enemy. This is not a chess game between DM and player. If you feel an antagonistic relationship between the players and the game masters, that's something to work on and address because you are on their side. You are fans of the character. I am a fan of the characters. I want to see them do awesome stuff. There's often jokes where like, it's totally unfair that you threw 2 Balors against us. And you're like, I didn't throw 2 Balors. The situation meant that there are Balors there. I'm just help negotiating the situation. I'm an antenna for the other worlds, right? And I get a lot of like narrowed-eyed looks at that. But I'm not just there to just beat their asses. I'm there to watch the story, have fun. And that's why I'm not a fan of like worrying too much about tactics as much as story. Players love to break the game. They enjoy it when their characters do something really awesome and break through it. They, the 1,000-year-old vampire that you thought was going to kick all their asses, they behead it. Like the champion fighter gets 2 crits on 4 attacks and does 130 points of damage and beheads the vampire. Awesome. Go with it, right? They're going to remember that more. They're going to remember the times when they dominated a fight more than they're going to remember the times where it was close and went as expected. When things don't go as expected, those are the memorable moments, and it's worth paying attention to that. So, and here again, like you can see the examples over on the left of where we summarize each of these chapters. So if you want to skim through them, you can. So what are some other tricks? These are truly lazy DM tricks. These are things that just make it easier to run the game. Reward levels instead of experience points, right? Just use the milestone rules for leveling if you can in whatever system you're running. Just give them levels when it's appropriate. Improvise skill and ability checks. Sometimes just ask for a roll. You don't need to have a DC in mind. You don't need to have a table that tells you the ideal DC. Sometimes just let them roll. If they roll poorly, something happens. If they roll well, something happens. But the variance and how that goes is going to be dependent upon what that roll looks like. So you don't really need to have all the mechanics in front of you all the time. Many times you don't have to roll for initiative. Instead, if the monsters go first, they go first, and then choose a direction around the table, and everybody goes around the table. Skip the direction back and forth so that you're not always starting with the first person and ending with the first person. And maybe for more complicated fights, you would roll for initiative. But generally, if the players get the drop on the monsters, they can all go, and then the monsters go. If the monsters get a drop on the players, then the monsters go, and then everyone goes. And in the other case, you can usually go around the table, and it doesn't matter too much. So it's a real good trick. You could probably, I bet you 2/3 of the time you don't have to roll for initiative, and you could just move. When you are doing initiative, though, delegate it along with other tasks to the players. Give one of your players the cards, and when you roll for initiative, have everyone tell that player, and the player puts out the cards while you're kind of preparing for combat. That's a good trick, easy trick. Using static monster damage. In the 5th edition of D&D, if you look at the monster manual, all of the damage that monsters do starts with a static number and then offers a damage calculation for the roll. Yet 80% of DMs roughly use the roll damage. They roll for damage rather than using static damage. Give it a shot, particularly in battles that don't matter, small fights where you just want to kind of get through it. Use static damage. Try it out. I now use static damage exclusively. I very rarely ever roll for monster damage. It's just, I don't need it, right? The variance in monster damage is not nearly as big as the variance in monster attack rolls. So attack rolls matter a lot. Damage rolls, not as much. Usually they even out over time. And probably the number one argument is, well, then my players are going to game the system and they know exactly how much damage it can take. Unless your players are different than mine don't pay that much attention. And the monsters usually only do so much damage anyway. They usually have multiple attacks that do different. No one's going to spend the time to worry about it. So only if it's like everyone's getting attacked by the same monster over and over, the same attack, and they go, well, I know he's going to hit me for about 15. But they could still do the averages in their head. So it just doesn't matter as much as they think. That's my belief. Assign a rules lawyer. If you have a player who's particularly interested in diving deep into the rules, give them the duty of adjudicating rules when a weird edge case comes up. If they're running fair, and they will, if you give them the authority, many times they're not going to cheat on the side of the players. You can hand it over to them, and they'll pick it up and run well with it. And another trick is run low level games. Right? The lower your game, the easier it is to run. So stick into those. The first tier and second tier of D&D 5th edition can help a lot. Third tier, fourth tier, harder to run. There's a lot new variables. Monsters are more complicated. The swinginess of challenge is really extreme. Challenging boss fights. Sorry, I got a cat. Challenging boss fights are a lot harder to balance at higher levels. So lower level campaigns tend to work well. So final thoughts. This is not the only style for DM prep. This isn't the right way to do it. I'm being absolutely clear about this. I did a lot of research and a lot of study into this whole area, and I kind of focused on what I think are the best approaches, but they are not the only ones. And many people spend a lot more time on their game prep than I do. When I had an opportunity to interview Matt Mercer about Critical Role and improvising, running NPCs, and he preps 3 hours for every hour of game prep, right? That's a lot of game prep. I'm not saying he's wrong, right? I mean, holy cow, I don't have a stream like his, so it's probably worth it. So there's lots of different approaches. I offer a bunch in here, but really you need to develop your own style. What's the right approach for you? That's what I think matters the most. So that is the book. I offer a bunch of appendices, including the 2016 Dungeon Master Survey that I ran, which fueled a lot of the stuff in this book, and also a whole bunch of Facebook and Twitter surveys that I ran that also helped give me an idea where things stand. And then I do recommend, most people don't want to read a bibliography, or they don't want to read the whole references. Read them. Take a look at them. There's a lot of stuff in here you might find really interesting that all fueled the drive of this book. So that is a review of the whole book. Between this and the 8 steps, you've seen everything that's in this book. I obviously hope that you will buy it and keep it on hand and read it. I gave a summary now, but all I gave was a cursory summary, so you can definitely get more by going through the book. In future videos, I'm going to go through each of the 8 steps, probably in 10-minute videos, and talk about the kinds of things that matter for each of those steps. So thank you very much for watching the video, and take a look at the book and go and play a great RPG. Thanks a lot.